Great. So I want to learn about Brexit. When Brexit was hot, they were asking about like the citizen whether should they vote for Britain to exit from the EU. That was around like maybe I can't remember, somewhere around like 2016, somewhere around 2015, 2016. And I never really understood what's the implication of that. Didn't understand what Brexit really is about. What is the benefit of Britain being in EU is about. And now that it is 2025, I don't know what is the fallout. Like, was it better for the citizens? Was it not good? So why don't you just go ahead and start? Give me an idea what Brexit was about.
That's a great question, and it's certainly a complex topic. You're right, the referendum happened in June 2016, and the whole process, known as Brexit, a portmanteau of British and exit, has had huge implications. Here's an overview of what Brexit is about, the core arguments for being in the EU, and the current fallout as of 2025. What was the European Union, EU, membership about? The European Union is an economic and political partnership of European countries. For the UK, being a member meant participation in several key areas that were at the heart of the debate. The single market, this was the biggest benefit. It meant the free movement of goods, services, capital, and people between the UK and all other EU member states. Benefit: zero tariffs, customs checks on goods traded with the EU, making it very easy and cheap for UK businesses to trade with their largest market, Europe. Customs union. This meant the UK had the same tariffs on goods imported from outside the EU as every other member state, simplifying trade. Free movement of people. UK citizens could easily live, work, study, and retire in any EU country, and vice versa. Benefit: access to a huge pool of labor for UK businesses and opportunities for UK citizens. Pooled sovereignty. The UK had a voice and a vote in EU laws, but in exchange, it had to follow some EU rules and contribute to the EU budget. The core arguments during the 2016 referendum. The campaign boiled down to a fundamental choice between trade/economic integration and national sovereignty/control. Arguments for leaving. The Leave campaign. Sovereignty, taking back control. The main argument was that the UK Parliament should be the supreme lawmaking body, not the EU and Brussels. Leaving would mean taking back control of laws, ending the supremacy of the European Court of Justice. Borders.
Okay. So I understand like what's the benefit of being in EU, but it was too fast for me to understand. Like what was the thing that triggered Britain to consider exiting from EU?
That's a very important clarification. While the benefits of the EU were clear for trade, the reasons that tipped the balance toward leaving were rooted in politics, sovereignty, and specific social concerns that had been brewing in the UK for decades. Here are the key factors that triggered the UK to consider, and ultimately vote for, leaving the EU. 1. The core issue: sovereignty and taking back control. This was the central emotional and political driving force for the Leave campaign. EU law supremacy. As an EU member, the UK was required to follow EU laws, and the European Court of Justice, ECJ, had final authority in many legal areas. For Eurosceptics, this meant the UK Parliament was no longer the supreme lawmaking body in its own country. The unaccountable bureaucracy. Many felt that the institutions in Brussels, the European Commission, were unelected and generated excessive regulations, red tape, without proper democratic accountability to British voters. The phrase "taking back control" became the powerful slogan for regaining full control.
Right. So I understand that I guess the power shifted to the EU lawmakers all of a sudden, and the people who were staying in Britain. Wait, is Britain? Britain is a city in United
That's a
Kingdom,
very
right?
insightful way to put it. The perception was exactly that. The power had shifted away from Westminster.
And also, I have a clarification. Tell me the geography of Britain again. Like, is Britain like capital, a city? What is the country? I kind of forgotten about my geography. What is the country that Britain is in? UK?
That's a great question, and it's easy to get the terms confused. The relationship between Britain and the UK is based on geography and politics. Britain versus the UK, a clarification. Britain is generally a shortened name for Great Britain. Great Britain is primarily a geographical term. It is the large island off the northwestern coast of continental Europe. Great Britain consists of 3 constituent countries. 1. England. 2. Scotland. 3. Wales. No, Britain is not a capital city. London is the capital city, and it is the capital of both England and the entire United Kingdom. The country, United Kingdom, UK. The country that Great Britain is in, or rather is a large part of, is the United Kingdom. The full official name is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, UK. The UK is a sovereign country, a state, and a political union. The UK comprises the island of Great Britain, England, Scotland, and Wales. plus the country of Northern Ireland, which is on the island of Ireland. In short,
So are you saying that when Brexit happened, it's not only the Great Britain, but also in England, Scotland, and Ireland?
that's a very insightful follow-up question that gets right to the heart of the matter. The short answer is, the United Kingdom, UK, as a whole, left the European Union, EU. Since the UK is the sovereign country, its withdrawal from the EU, known as Brexit, applied to all 4 of its constituent countries: England,
I
Scotland,
see.
Wales, Northern Ireland. However, the political and social dynamics of the vote were very different in each region, and that difference is what made the process so complicated, especially for Northern Ireland. Brexit referendum breakdown. The 2016 referendum was a single vote across the entire UK, and the overall result was a vote to leave. Constituent country.
I
Voted
see.
to leave. Voted to remain. England, 53.4%. Leave. 46.6%.
Wow.
Remain. Wales,
I see.
52.5%. Leave. 47.5%.
Okay.
Remain. Scotland, 38.0%. Leave. 62.0%. Remain. Northern Ireland,
Scotland got the bad
44.2%.
end of it.
Leave. 55.8%. Remain. The Northern Ireland complexity. The most challenging aspect of Brexit was Northern Ireland. Because Northern Ireland voted to remain and shares a land border with the Republic of Ireland, which remains an EU member state, a unique agreement was needed to avoid creating a hard border on the island of Ireland. The solution, known as the Northern Ireland Protocol, or the Windsor Framework, means that Northern Ireland still follows.
All right, so I understand now that when you say Brexit, you're referring to people that is in the United Kingdom, specifically people from the Great Britain, England, Scotland, and some parts of Northern Ireland. Now, I always thought that people who is from England is actually British. I thought they are the Britons.
That's a very common confusion, and your instinct that people from England are British is actually correct in a broader sense, but it misses an important nuance about identity. Here is the breakdown of the terms people use. The official term, British. British is the official term of nationality/citizenship for anyone from the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, UK. Therefore, a person born in England, Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland is officially a British citizen. In this sense, an English person is British. The national identity term, English. However, people in the UK often prefer to use their.
Okay, great. So now I'm going to refer to the British then, since I understand the context of the British and Brexit now. And let's go back to the power, right? Loss of sovereignty and power. How did the power to make laws or take control of the United Kingdom go to EU? And does it apply to other European countries or part of the European Union where they, to what extent?
That's a very complex and important question. The debate over sovereignty was the core of the Brexit argument, and it fundamentally defines the nature of the European Union, EU. The loss of power isn't a simple surrender of authority, but rather a pooling or delegation of power, which is the foundational design of the EU. 1. How the UK transferred power to the EU. The UK didn't physically hand over its parliament, but it passed a piece of domestic law that gave legal effect to EU law in the UK. The key mechanism, the European Communities Act 1972, ECA. When the UK joined the European Communities, the predecessor to the EU, in 1973, the UK Parliament passed the European Communities Act 1972. This act stated, direct applicability. Certain types of EU law, like regulations, would automatically become law in the UK without needing Parliament to vote on them. Supremacy of EU law.
All right, I'm going to try to make this a bit more easier to consume content. And also, I want you to, each time when you generate your response, try not to put in fluff and just get straight to the point. And going back to this topic, can you tell me in a real life situation, a real life example, instances where the people are pointing out to the government of Great Britain, that we're losing power?
You're asking for the concrete examples, the specific real-world instances that fueled the public debate about the UK government losing power to the EU. Here are 3 clear, prominent examples that people frequently pointed to as instances of the EU overriding or limiting the power of the British government or the UK Parliament.
Right.
1.
That's what I want to know.
Immigration and border control, the lost power. The UK government could not control the entry of citizens from other EU member states. The real-life impact. Freedom of movement. As part of the EU's single market, the UK had to allow any EU citizen to enter and live in the UK to work or look for work. The government's hands were tied. The British government could not introduce a points-based system or place caps on the number of workers coming from EU countries. The ability to take back control of borders and establish a national immigration policy was a core promise of the Brexit campaign. Public grievance. While EU migration was generally beneficial for the UK economy, the sheer scale of the increase led to public concerns about pressure on public services, like schools and the National Health Service, which became a major political talking point, cited as a loss of sovereignty. 2. The fishermen's quotas, the lost power. The UK government lost its exclusive power to determine who could fish in its territorial waters and how much they could catch. The real-life impact. The Common Fisheries Policy, CFP. The EU's CFP dictated fishing quotas, how many fish could be caught, and access to waters for all member states. Feeling of injustice. Many British fishermen felt that the UK had been unfairly allocated a smaller share of the fish in its own waters compared to other EU fleets. The veto power was gone. While the UK participated in negotiating the CFP, its own parliament could not unilaterally change the rules or assert total control over its fishing grounds without leaving the EU. This was frequently cited as a powerful, symbolic loss of national resource control. 3. The supremacy of European courts, the lost power. The UK Parliament was no longer the ultimate supreme lawmaking body, because the rulings of the European Court of Justice, ECJ, could overrule UK law. The real-life impact. The Factortame case, 1990. This is the single most famous legal example. A Spanish fishing company sued the UK government over a UK law designed to limit foreign ownership of fishing vessels. The ECJ ruled in favor of the Spanish company, forcing the UK government to change its law. Legal sovereignty.
I see.
This case proved that if a UK law conflicted with an EU law, in this case, the principle of non-discrimination based on nationality, UK courts had to set aside the UK law. This was seen by proponents of Brexit as the ultimate erosion of parliamentary sovereignty, a foundational principle of the British Constitution. Example, the Working Time Directive. The EU's directive sets minimum requirements for workers' rights, such as limits on working hours and entitlement to paid annual leave. The UK Parliament could not reduce these rights below the EU's minimum standard, even if a future UK government wanted to, which was seen by some as an outside limit on the UK's ability to regulate its own labor market. These examples demonstrated that in areas where the EU had competence, like the single market, competition, and trade, the UK's government and parliament had delegated authority and were required to follow the rules of the larger bloc.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you were saying that immigration and border control, because today in 2025, we see a lot of news in the European side, except for Poland, where, they are welcoming illegal immigrants over there. Can you just zoom into what's happening right now? And is it because of any influence from Brexit that make UK the way it is right now with
That is a
illegal
very
immigrants?
timely question, and it connects the theoretical sovereignty debate, Brexit, with the highly visible, emotional issue of migration in Europe today. Based on what we see in late 2025, the situation around migration in Europe is dominated by two things: the new EU Migration and Asylum Pact and the strong national stance of countries like Poland. Here is a zoomed-in look at the current situation and the relationship to Brexit. The current European migration situation, late 2025. 1. The EU's shift to stricter control. The overall trend across the European Union is a move toward tighter border controls and a push to process asylum claims more quickly, often at the border or even in third countries. The Migration and Asylum Pact, the EU, passed a major set of laws in 2024 to create a more coordinated system. The core of this pact is a mandatory solidarity mechanism. The principle: when a member state is overwhelmed with migrant arrivals, like Greece or Italy, other EU countries must provide support. The obligation: this support is mandatory, and a country must either take in asylum seekers or pay a financial contribution, fines, for each person they refuse to take. This effectively ends the ability for countries to simply ignore the pressure on frontline states. 2. Poland's stance. The welcoming.
So I got a question. Why illegal immigration? Illegal immigrants. Why?
That's a vital clarification. Illegal immigrants is a broad term, but in the current European context, particularly in the news, it refers to two main groups of people, categorized by how they arrive and where they come from. The preferred and more neutral term for people arriving without the necessary permits is irregular migrants or unauthorized migrants. Here is a straightforward breakdown of who these people are, their origins, and the routes they use. Who are the irregular migrants? By origin. The majority of people attempting to enter Europe irregularly come from regions experiencing conflict, political instability, or severe economic hardship. Top nationalities detected entering the EU 2025 data. Rank. Country of origin. Primary driver. 1. Afghanistan. Ongoing conflict and instability. Taliban rule. Lack of human rights. 2. Bangladesh, poverty, low-wage jobs, and climate vulnerability. Many travel for economic reasons. 3. Syria.
I see. So I'm seeing your response. You're saying like the nationalities defected entering into the EU is Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Syria, Senegal, Iran. And people from these countries often apply for asylum once they reach European soil because they are arguing they are refugees fleeing persecution of war, which is their legal right. Okay, I understand now. And can you tell me why is Poland part of EU and why isn't Poland, bringing them in?
That is a brilliant question that gets to the core of the conflict between national sovereignty and EU solidarity. Poland's position is a classic example of a member state prioritizing its own national interests, despite being a dedicated EU member. Here is a direct, straightforward breakdown of Poland's position. Why is Poland part of the EU? The benefits. Poland joined the European Union in 2004 after the collapse of the Soviet bloc for overwhelmingly positive political and economic reasons. Goal. Benefit of EU membership. Economic growth, access to the single market. Polish businesses can trade freely across the entire EU. Poland has received billions of euros in EU development funds, structural funds, to build modern infrastructure, highways, railways, etc. Security and stability. Return to Europe. Integration with Western democracies anchored Poland securely away from Russian influence and cemented its democratic system. Freedom of movement. Polish citizens gained the right to freely live and work in any other EU country, which led to significant job opportunities across Western Europe. Political influence. Poland gained a vote and a voice in the world's largest economic bloc, unlike a non-member like the UK now, giving it more global power. Why isn't Poland bringing them in? The migration stance. Poland is not refusing to accept all migrants, but it is firmly rejecting the mandatory relocation of irregular migrants from other EU countries. Their reasons are largely based on current events and national security. 1. The Ukrainian refugee burden, the argument for exemption, the scale. Since 2022, Poland has taken in millions of refugees from Ukraine, most of whom remain in the country. Poland argues that managing this crisis is its massive, involuntary contribution to EU solidarity. The principle. The Polish government argues it is unfair to be forced to take on additional migrants from the south, e.g. from Syria, Afghanistan, when it has already shouldered such an enormous burden from the east. Current status. Late 2025. The EU is now largely acknowledging this point. The European Commission has indicated it will recognize Poland as a country under migratory pressure and granted an exemption from the mandatory relocation quotas and the associated fines, the 20,000 euros per person contribution. 2. The eastern border as
That's why the Polish prime minister is so gung-ho, about the illegal immigration policy. Okay, now let's go back to Brexit, right? Let's go back to United Kingdom. And it seems like United Kingdom is also having this issue right now as well. There's a lot of YouTube videos that show like the state of UK and what if they had had Brexit like in 2016, why are they having this issue? Because I only noticed the pattern of, this illegal immigrants coming to Europe just recently.
major unintended consequence of Brexit. The very issue the UK voted to control, immigration, has become more acute and visible in a different way. You are correct that the visible crisis of small boats crossing the English Channel from France to the UK is a recent phenomenon post-2018, and it has happened after the UK voted for Brexit. Here is the straightforward explanation of the Brexit paradox. The Brexit paradox, why illegal migration is worse. The goal of Brexit was to end the free movement of EU citizens and take back control of borders. It succeeded in that goal, but it simultaneously undermined the UK's ability to manage unauthorized arrivals from non-EU countries. 1. Loss of the Dublin Regulation, the biggest factor. Before Brexit, the UK was part of the Dublin Regulation, which was a mechanism that allowed the UK to send asylum seekers back to the first safe EU country they had entered, which was almost always France or Belgium. Before 2021, in the EU, if a person reached the UK and claimed asylum, the UK government could say, "You passed through France first, so we return you to France to process your claim." After 2021, post-Brexit, the UK lost access to this automatic returns mechanism. The UK government cannot force France or other EU countries to take these people back without a specific bilateral treaty. The result, smugglers realized this immediately. The UK became a final one-way destination, as it was much harder to be returned once an asylum claim was lodged. This made the UK a more attractive final target for irregular migrants who had already crossed Europe. 2. The Channel crossing became the only option. Before the small boats became a crisis, most unauthorized migrants came to the UK hidden in lorries, trucks, or ferries. Increased border security in France. The UK government invested heavily in security measures on the French side, fences, security checks at Calais and Dunkirk. Smugglers shifted tactics. As it became nearly impossible to hide in a lorry, the smuggling network simply shifted to using dangerous, easily purchased small dinghies to cross the 33 kilometers of the English Channel. The visibility. The crisis became much more visible because small boats must be rescued or intercepted, creating constant media coverage and political pressure on the UK government, a situation that did not exist before Brexit. 3. Increased global asylum applications. While Brexit is a major factor, the rise in irregular migration is also part of a global trend. The number of people fleeing conflict, poverty, and climate change from countries like Afghanistan, Syria, and Iran has been rising steadily worldwide since 2020. This pressure affects all of Europe, including the UK. In short, before Brexit in the EU, after Brexit independent, EU migration, high but legal.
Right. Okay. So I understand about the illegal immigration issue that's happening in UK, and I think that's a pretty good topic for another video. Now let's go back to Brexit. Can you tell me like the bullet points again? What triggered the need for Brexit?
I can certainly provide a concise summary of the main factors that triggered the need for the 2016 Brexit referendum. The decision to leave the European Union was driven by a mix of political, economic, and cultural concerns, often summarized by the campaign slogan, "Take Back Control." Here are the key bullet.
All right, so you have sovereignty laws, and the UK Parliament was no longer the ultimate authority. I get that already. Immigration and borders, the problem. The UK had to accept the freedom of movement. All right. Money and budget. The UK was a net contributor to the EU budget. Oh, okay, so that means UK have been paying it more than it directly receives. So they're giving more and taking less. Of course, if I am in that position, I wouldn't like it as well. The trigger point would be the feeling that billions of pounds are being sent to Brussels that could be better spent at home. And there's also the problem of trade and regulation. As a member of the EU's custom union, the UK cannot sign independent free trade deals with fast growing. Okay, all right. So I want to ask like, so the UK is basically the more advanced or well-to-do country in Europe. That's so basically UK is like the more well-to-do, better country in Europe, and they seem to be giving more and taking less, and EU kind of slow them down. But what was the pros and cons of Brexit laid simply for here for me to listen?
That's a great question, and the debate around Brexit, the UK's departure from the European Union, is highly complex with significant arguments on both sides. Your perspective that the UK was a wealthy, influential country contributing heavily is part of what fueled the debate, as some felt their contributions were not sufficiently rewarded, or that they could better deploy their resources independently. Here is a simplified breakdown of the key arguments, both the pros, benefits cited by those who supported leaving, often called leavers, and the cons, drawbacks cited by those who supported remaining, often called remainers. Pros of Brexit, arguments for leaving the EU. These points largely center on regaining control and sovereignty, regained sovereignty and control of laws. The UK is no longer subject to the supremacy of EU law and the European Court of Justice, ECJ. UK Parliament has full authority to make its own laws without external influence. Control over borders and immigration. The UK ended the free movement of people from the EU and implemented its own points-based immigration system. This was aimed at controlling the number of people entering the country and prioritizing skilled workers. Independent trade policy. The UK gained the freedom to negotiate its own bilateral trade deals with countries all over the world, e.g., in the Indo-Pacific, US, India, without being part of the EU's common external tariff. Proponents argued this allows the UK to pivot towards faster-growing global markets. Ending EU budget contributions. The UK stopped paying large net contributions to the EU budget, with the money instead available for domestic priorities like the NHS, National Health Service. Regulatory freedom. The ability to set domestic regulations, reducing what supporters viewed as unnecessary red tape from Brussels, potentially boosting business competitiveness in areas like financial services. Cons of Brexit. Drawbacks of leaving the EU. These points largely center on economic friction and loss of influence. New trade barriers and economic friction. The UK lost frictionless access to the EU's single market and customs union, the world's largest trading bloc, and the UK's biggest trading partner. This introduced new customs checks, paperwork, and regulatory divergence for goods and services traded with the EU, increasing costs and delays for businesses. Economic impact and uncertainty. Economic analysis suggests Brexit has negatively impacted UK trade, investment, and productivity, potentially reducing long-term GDP. The value of the pound sterling, GBP, fell significantly following the vote, contributing to higher import costs and inflation. The City of London has seen some financial services activity move to EU cities like Frankfurt and Paris. Loss of free movement benefits. loss of the automatic right for UK citizens to live, work, and retire freely in EU countries, and vice versa. Businesses and public services like the
Oh,
NHS have faced shortages of EU workers in key sectors. Diminished global influence. Critics argue that outside the EU, the UK has less diplomatic and political leverage on the world stage, as it no longer speaks as part of a major bloc. The UK also lost direct participation in
wow.
EU programs, like the Erasmus Student Exchange Scheme, Northern Ireland Protocol. The need to avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland, part of the UK, and the Republic of Ireland, part of the EU, created a complex new trading border in the Irish Sea, which has caused political and trade friction within the UK. In summary, the core argument for Brexit was sovereignty, while the core argument against it was economy and market access. The actual outcome is still a subject of intense
I see.
debate, as the long-term effects continue to unfold. Is there a particular sector like
Yeah, so I wanted to know that now that we're 9 years off from 2016, how has this two sides of the coin played out in terms of economy and in terms of like sovereignty?
That's a very insightful question. 9 years after the 2016 referendum, and with the UK officially leaving the EU in 2020 and the transition period ending in 2021, we now have enough data to see how those two sides of the coin, economy and sovereignty, have actually played out. The consensus among major economic and political analyses leans toward a significant increase in sovereignty at the cost of a measurable negative impact on the economy. The cons have largely materialized. The economic costs predicted by most institutions, like the Office for Budget Responsibility, Bank of England, and academic bodies, have largely played out, sometimes even exceeding initial long-term forecasts. Economic aspect, outcome, description, GDP and productivity, negative impact.
Can you tell me a story of the negative impact on the economy in a more of a storytelling point of view instead of giving me a table form?
That's an excellent way to frame it. Numbers and tables tell the macro story, but the true negative impact on the economy is felt in the stories of small businesses and everyday people. Here is a fictionalized story drawn from the consistent accounts
Sure.
of UK small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, in the years following the end of the transition period. The Tale of the Tiny Textile Shop. Part 1, The Seamless Past. Meet Eleanor. Her business, Willow Stitch, was a tiny, independent textile shop tucked away in Nottingham, specializing in high-end, uniquely patterned throws, cushion covers, and fabrics. For years, Europe was her best market outside the UK. Before 2021, selling to an art gallery in Berlin or a boutique in Paris was as simple as selling to a customer in Manchester. Eleanor would print a label, pop the package onto the post office counter, and it would seamlessly flow across the English Channel. Her German customer, Frau Muller, would receive the package, and the transaction was clean and easy. EU sales made up about 30% of her revenue. Part 2, The Customs Shock. When the UK officially left the Single Market and Customs Union, the music stopped. The first sign of trouble was in January. Eleanor processed a new order from an Italian furniture shop, a loyal customer for 5 years. She sent the package, and a week later it was sitting in a warehouse in Calais. The paperwork labyrinth, she received a frantic email from the shipping company. She hadn't included an accurate customs declaration, detailing the commodity code for each item, a 10-digit number she'd never needed before, a proof of origin for the fabric, and a formal commercial invoice. Her simple 3-page shipping form was now a 10-page, bureaucratic beast, the rules of origin nightmare. To claim the benefit of the UK-EU trade deal, zero tariffs, Eleanor had to prove that the throws were substantially made in the UK. But her specialty yarn came from a mill in Portugal. She spent 2 weeks drowning in supplier invoices and complex legal text, diverting time she should have spent designing, weaving, or marketing. Part 3, The Customer's Cost. Eleanor eventually got the paperwork right, but then came the second shock, the cost. The Italian customer, expecting to pay only the £200 product price, was hit with an additional bill upon delivery, VAT, value-added tax, and a customs handling fee charged by the courier for doing the clearance work. It added almost 30% to their final bill. The customer was furious, feeling blindsided and cheated. It's economically impossible to trade with the UK at present, they wrote, canceling their next order. Part 4, The Investment Stalemate. This friction quickly choked off Willow Stitch's European market. Other EU customers stopped ordering, unwilling.
So basically, ensuring lots of business because of higher costs. The higher cost came about all the friction that came about it. All right. Now, can you tell me what about the sovereignty side of things? Tell me a story on the outcome since you're already gone with this format. Now, tell me the other side of the story in terms of the sovereignty since you've gone with this format. Let's continue to do the same. How did it play it out?
That is a perfect continuation. To balance Eleanor's struggle, we need to look at the stories of people who felt empowered and saw the promise of sovereignty fulfilled. Here is a fictionalized story, drawn from the experiences and motivations of those who championed taking back control. The Tale of the Free Hand, Part 1, The Frustration of Rules. Meet Robert. He is a career politician who, for decades, felt a deep sense of frustration. His world was not tiles, but the complex, tedious, and often opaque world of international law and regulation. For years, as a member of parliament, he felt his hands were tied. The problem, as Robert saw it, was the European.
All right, I kind of don't want to hear the story, especially I know he's a career politician. Basically, who are these people? How are these people who has been voted to leave Brexit, right? 57% in the England, right? How does it impact their daily lives now?
That is an important distinction. The emotional and political satisfaction of sovereignty doesn't always translate into a better material life, especially for the core group of voters who supported leaving. The profile of the strongest Leave voters in 2016 was generally older, less educated, and often living in economically struggling areas outside of major cities like London. Their key motivators were not abstract economic models, but control of borders and laws, in a sense that they had been left behind by political elites and globalization. Here is an analysis of how the outcome has impacted the daily lives of these core Leave voters. The daily reality for the core Leave voter. The outcomes for the daily lives of these voters are complex, marked by a frustrating mix of political promises fulfilled and economic hardship intensified. 1. The cost of living pinch,
So they're back to
the
complaining
negative
about the
economic
government
impact.
again.
This is the most direct and widely felt negative impact. Higher bills, same pay. Brexit has contributed to higher inflation and increased costs for imports, food, clothing, fuel, etc. Since many core Leave voters live on fixed incomes, pensions, or work in low-wage sectors, the cost of living crisis has hit them hard. The economic friction that ruined Eleanor's business in the previous story trickles down to their supermarket bill. Strain on public services. The financial savings promised by leaving the EU budget have been swallowed up by economic friction and increased spending demands. Furthermore, key sectors like the NHS, National Health Service, and social care have seen a decline in the number of EU workers, contributing to staff shortages and increased wait times. A major disappointment for voters who were promised that money would be diverted to the NHS. No leveling up. Many Leave voting areas were promised leveling up, increased investment to boost opportunity. While the government has created new funds to replace EU regional grants, the economic slowdown caused by Brexit has meant that the promised transformation in their towns and cities has not materialized to the extent they hoped. 2. The sense of control, the sovereignty fulfillment. This is where the satisfaction lies, despite the financial cost. We did it factor. For many, the simple fact that the UK left and Parliament regained control is the ultimate non-negotiable win. They achieved the political goal of national self-determination, which was always more important to them than economic forecasts.
So how has UK performed financially after Brexit? Of course, there's the immediate slump with the inflation and the financial institutions moving away. But in terms of, performing well on the global markets, how are they doing?
That's a very crucial distinction to make. The question isn't just about the domestic UK economy, but how the UK is positioned and performing on the global stage after deliberately changing its primary trading relationship. The financial performance of the UK post-Brexit has been characterized by resilience in services, but significant underperformance in goods trade and overall global market share when compared to its peers. Here is the breakdown of the UK's financial performance on global markets. 1. The tale of two trade sectors, goods versus services. The UK's global performance varies dramatically, depending on whether you look at manufacturing, goods, or services. Sector. Performance on global markets. Key takeaway, goods, exports. Underperforming, exports of goods to the EU.
Okay, let's see. So goods exports is underperforming. Exports of goods to the EU fell sharply after 2021 and remained significantly below their pre-Brexit trend. And service is outperforming. So UK is a global powerhouse in services. Like goods, UK service exports have grown strongly to both EU and non-EU partners. All right. In summary, the UK remains a highly successful global exporter of services, but the economic damage from trade barriers with the EU is overwhelmingly concentrated. The status of global finance, this was the most feared area, and the reality is mixed. Asset migration, the prediction of financial institutions moving away did materialize. Loss of edge, the UK's market share of financial services in major EU economies has declined. And continued global leadership, despite the movement, London remains one of the top 2 or 3 global financial centers. It still dominates. Okay, all right, trade deals. So let's have a summary to wrap up this topic. So, in summary, give me your summary of what we talked about in terms of Brexit.
That's a perfect way to conclude our discussion. The story of Brexit 9 years on is a trade off where the political promise was achieved, but the economic cost has been measurable and persistent. Here is a summary of the core outcomes we discussed regarding sovereignty and the economy. Brexit summary: the trade off between control and cost. Sovereignty. The political goal achieved, the pros played out. The core promises of taking back control have been legally delivered, fulfilling the primary motivation of Leave voters. Lawmaking independence. The UK Parliament is now the ultimate authority, free from the supremacy of EU law and the European Court of Justice, ECJ. Border control. The UK ended the free movement of people from the EU and implemented its own global, points-based.
Yeah, okay, I think I get the summary. Yep. So I think life just kind of moves on. For those of you guys who have your thoughts about Brexit, please let me know in the comment section down below. Of course, I can't cover everything about this topic as I'm actually just learning while I'm walking. But a lot of key important details definitely is not going to be able to go through because that actually requires studying and looking at data. So let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And also, do suggest what other topics you want me to learn. The whole world is so big.